Hello everyone and welcome to a special edition of Lancaster Safety's Webinar Wednesdays. As some of you know, we host OSHA-related webinars once a month for free in order to spread safety awareness and education to people all over the United States. Lancaster Safety Consulting is a full-service, nationwide OSHA compliance firm that is always seeking ways to take safety beyond the standard. As an industry leader, we are proud to have teamed up with OpenArc, a software and technology solutions company, for today's webinar. So I'd like to first start by introducing our presenters, and then we'll go from there. So I'm here today with Nick Spinda, who is an OSH sales consultant and has been with Lancaster Safety for just over 5 years. He's passionate about spreading safety awareness and often works one-on-one with companies to solidify and establish the start of an effective safety program. I'm also joined today by Mark Lauder, who is the Director of Human-Centered Design at OpenArc, a leader in creating VR-based training experiences. Mark has helped companies address their most important needs by helping them create engaging experiences that connect with their employees and customers. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Emily. Appreciate that introduction. This is Nick Spinda here with Lancaster Safety, and as Emily mentioned, we're pleased to be joined by Mark from OpenArc. And today's topics are going to be, pretty straightforward here. Top reasons for safety and health training. Obviously, we want to cover the reasons why you want to, obviously do this in the first place. But beyond that, obviously, current training methods and the challenges that they present, because there's obviously a variety of methods to get, the message across to your employees, and they all carry their pros and cons. Why traditional training methods work, and obviously maybe some issues with them as well. How we can help improve the training, and obviously the VR experience, which was the reason why we brought in Mark, and I think he's going to be able to expand to a great deal on the technology side and some of the experiences OpenArc's had with virtual reality training. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick.
All right, so let's dive right in. Top 3 reasons for safety and health training. And a lot of these shouldn't come as a surprise. Number 1 on the board for most people in most cases is going to be OSHA. OSHA's out there, they're getting bigger, they're certainly not shrinking. The fines are increasing, and obviously for all of our clients and for anyone that's been following OSHA, this is a situation that needs to be handled. You got to be compliant, and training is a top reason or a top thing that OSHA's looking for when they walk through your door. So it's very important that your employees are properly communicated to, and obviously they understand the rules and regulations and how a company puts together its safety policies and protocols. And obviously training is the number 1 method to obviously get that, to educate your employees on those policies. Number 2 would obviously be preventing accidents. This is obviously the moral case for safety, and we've done multiple webinars on this. But no one wants to make that phone call to loved ones saying that unfortunately there's been an accident, something went wrong. So it's important that your employees properly understand the need for safety and follow those policies, because obviously that's something no one ever wants to experience. And the third one would be workforce development. When it comes to workforce development, as we touched upon, OSHA and accidents, but beyond that, you want to reduce, your business case for safety, workman's comp issues, or making people more efficient at their job. Safety training can actually add to efficiencies when it comes to running a company. So we definitely want to make sure that you're getting maximum return on your investment. And a little bit later today, I think Mark is going to be making the case strongly, I believe, why virtual reality can be definitely help supplement some of the other training skills and methods that you're obviously implementing into your company today. So some of the current training methods. The first one and foremost is going to be classroom. Most people think of training and, you think of schooling and education, and a lot of that brings back classroom, which is obviously, a professor or a trainer or an educator standing in front of the room, going through. Sometimes you'll do some hands-on activities or some other skills that are confined within the classroom. Obviously, there are some great advantages to this. You can engage students. You can, curtail information. You can certainly dive into the content, read the audience, and certainly get the message across. It's also very effective from a time standpoint. As you're going through the information, you can see, read the situation, and move on accordingly. Obviously, online training, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a slide or two, obviously has its advantages, and seems like to be the trend is going in that way, and I'm going to kind of save some of that content for that slide. Group discussions is being more and more utilized. This can be a great way for students to come up with their own content and certainly drive the discussion. And when it comes to the group discussion too, it's important to realize this is often overlooked. When you don't really know a subject until you're teaching a subject, and a lot of times group discussion can allow people to fully engage and immerse themselves because now some of the emphasis is on them. They're not just a bystander when it comes to the training. Hands-on techniques has widely been known to be a useful method of training employees. Obviously, getting that feel, that experience, and actually doing what they're learning can be a great way, because you can learn about it, you can talk about it, you can certainly read about it, but until you've actually been in the situation, it's very difficult to really get that training across. And hands-on techniques is obviously a tried and true method of doing so. And then obviously on the job, this can be great for a lot of employers because they do things differently. So it's important for people to understand a company's methodologies and the way they're doing things and how they want things done. Sometimes this can be supervised, other times not so much. It really just depends on obviously how you want to do it and obviously what's needed. Sometimes one of the benefits to this is it can happen you can obviously get some productivity out of your workforce, but one of the biggest cons in my eyes, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but obviously it can sometimes take a little bit of time for people to get caught up. And again, obviously sometimes employers don't want to put forward that type of outlay financially, getting people obviously waiting for them to learn on the job. And then obviously we have demonstration. Demonstration can be used in a variety of different ways. Kind of incorporate some of the other prior methods, and Alan, Mark, what do you got on demonstration? I feel like I'm talking too much here.
Yeah, all of these are great, great techniques. There is no one right answer, and I think that ties into what we're going to talk about next. Is to think about, you really want what is going to give you the best impact. Not everybody learns in the same way. So, it's not that one technique is better than another. It might be for a particular kind of training that you're doing, but you've heard people say like, oh, I'm more of a visual learner, or people are great at reading something and then they just retain it kind of in a solitary way. People having group discussions and seeing demos and talking about those demos are very effective sometimes. And actually getting hands-on training or some people are very good in a classroom setting, right? When you're learning something in a manufacturing setting, for example, it might be better to give somebody the principles first and then follow up with some hands-on training or something, either a model of the actual machinery, let's say, or the actual piece of equipment itself, if you can avoid, if it's not in a dangerous setting and couldn't hurt themselves or others, or you wouldn't have to have some downtime in that setting to do it. So that's really where I think VR is a big help, and we can talk about a bit more, is it really engages a lot of the senses, and it is more memorable. It's proving through some early research that we're going to talk about that, it really engages people with these different learning styles to get the best results. That's really what it's about. It's not about the coolest, technology, although it is pretty cool and people gravitate toward it. It kind of makes a splash when it's used, but it's really not about the splash. It's about the impact and the memorability and the stickiness of the training that you're giving to people.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that it's hard to know until you're actually engaging an employee what type of learner they are. And one of the things that we're going to get into when we get into the VR stuff is that how it engages multiple senses and kind of combines some of these at the same time. Whereas, so you can kind of do one training and hit multiple different training groups or learning styles at the same time. But obviously, if you're straight classroom and you got a learner that is more of a social learner, then that classroom training isn't going to take hold. Whereas quite the opposite, if you have somebody that learns more from doing things, or did I just mix that up? But either way, I think everybody gets what I'm saying. Is that a lot of these other training methods we just covered only hit on one or two bases here of the different types of learners. And again, as you bring on companies, or as companies bring on employees, but not always asking them what type of learner are you, so we can obviously perform that type of training for you. So online safety training is trending, and this is something that we get more and more of. People, inquiring with Lancaster is, what type of online resources. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits to online where you can sit one person down in front of the computer. People can be in multiple areas. You can pull up different training modules. They can go through them at their own speed. But, online training isn't always recognized by OSHA as compliant across various different subject matter. I mean, some areas it works a lot better than others, simply because there's no really testing. I mean, yes, you can put a quiz, but is the person adapting it, or are they just regurgitating something they remembered from a slide? Is anybody actually challenging them on this? Are they getting in depth? And more than anything, can the student actually learn or engage the software to pull more from it if they want to explore or learn more from a particular module? A lot of times with the online, although it does definitely serve its purpose, it limits the learner's ability, obviously from the way they learn if they're not a visual or classroom learner, but it also, that if the learner or the employee wants to learn more of a particular subject matter or go and do a deep dive, if you will, sometimes it can be more difficult because, again, it's preset, and if there's no one there actually engaging that learner, then obviously sometimes you're not getting as much from it as you would hope. And Mark, I mean, obviously working in the cyberspace, if you will, pardon my lack of technological awareness, but what has been your thoughts on online training? I mean, have you guys experienced that at OpenArc at all?
Yeah, learning management systems and training are a great way to consistently put a syllabus of your material out there that you want people to, if you have a workforce that you're trying to track their progress. But I think we've probably all been to training where we go to that training and then we come back and then we don't really have like a particular place to apply that. So it kind of gets a little bit more vague in our minds every day, and unless we apply it and refresh it and put it into practice. So I think the combination that VR offers to both give people information and then allow them to kind of quote unquote apply it in a hands-on situation is a really compelling value proposition for learning just about anything, whether it's training or in a variety of settings. So if it's inspection methods or hands-on training with setup of a particular piece of machinery or loading pallets in a certain way, or you can think of a lot of different ways. But yeah, online training is definitely out there. I mean, they're in a whole LMS industry built around this, so it's not going away. But yeah, proper application and again, having it be one of the things that you're, one of the vehicles that you're providing for your employees to learn is probably the larger message.
And that's it too. I mean, a mixture. There's, as we talked about, there's different learning styles. People learn differently. So having a nice combination of training tools at your disposal for any employer is obviously going to be valuable. So you're making sure you're hitting every employee, independent of what their particular learning style is, which kind of gets us into, the lecture or the instructor-led type training, which again has a lot of benefits to it, but it certainly has some cons. In an instructor-led course, your employees really aren't experiencing it. Yeah, you can do some hands-on, but that even has some limitability or limits to it, which we're going to talk about when we get into VR a bit more. But it does allow you to, it's kind of the opposite of the online stuff where you can read the crowd, you can engage the crowd, you can make sure people are understanding and obviously spend more time on the areas that people want to learn more about or struggling with. But at the same time, obviously an instructor is limited because obviously they're teaching a room full of people. Sometimes when people are in a room, they're less likely to ask those questions or properly engage the instructor. So obviously, although instructor-led training in a lot of ways is one of the more advanced, not necessarily advanced, but better ways of training individuals, certainly does carry its own drawbacks as well.
Yeah, instructor-led training can be great when you get somebody who's really knowledgeable. So if you distill kind of standards and what can be tribal knowledge within a company, and that can be expressed or taught to somebody through somebody who is a kind of the keeper of that information, or any way that you can standardize it, whether it's in VR or an instructor leading a presentation or leading a hands-on session. Those are all great way to engage a team.
All right. Well, and now the moment I think everybody's been waiting for. Let's talk a little bit more about VR and let's learn some of the advantages of virtual reality training compared to some of the other methods we've talked about. And obviously, Mark, you're going to be more the expert than me on this, although I've tested the software and it is pretty impressive. But what are some of the major advantages you see with some of your clients, or even just in general within the field that people are experiencing with virtual reality?
Yeah, well, just a little background. I mean, I think everybody probably knows what we're talking about with virtual reality, but it's you're wearing a headset and you're holding controllers in a simulated environment, and that environment is made to be whatever we need it to be to get across the teaching principles that a client wants to get across to their employees. So whether it's inspecting a steam generator or looking at a manufacturing setting and trying to find and resolve errors. Or setting up a piece of machinery, those environments are created to help guide people through that teaching experience or that playing world, right? So VR is not just for your kids anymore, right? It used to be on the Gartner hype cycle, but it's no longer on there, right? It's considered mainstream. So and one of the biggest benefits is that it can have realistic scenarios, right? It's not talking about a specific scenario. You're in the moment, right? Imagine yourself one of the big advantages of this over perhaps a one-on-one or a classroom setting might be that in a classroom setting you might be able to tune out or get distracted by something, right? When you're in VR, you're wearing a headset and you're in that environment holding those controllers, and if your phone rings or you feel a buzz in your pocket from your phone, right? You can't you feel like you're in that environment, right? You're on the edge of a scaffolding pier, and you feel like you're on that edge looking over, and you get those tingles in the back of your neck, like, I don't like being up this high, right? I don't like being this close to the railing. So,
and that's actually a good learning experience to itself. If you're in that VR training and your phone rings, and you're up on that high rise or wherever the situation might be, then you get that experience. Oh crap, maybe I should turn my phone off and not really have this on when I'm doing this particular activity.
So the realistic scenarios, you can create those settings where somebody can go down a path and they tighten down a particular bolt in the wrong sequence, and then the outcome is, right, you get feedback on that training, right? You didn't do this, so you can track their behavior and you can give them some feedback and tips along the way. And that can be done individually, so somebody can do this for initial orientation, and they can also do it for a refresher. So if you have jobs where there's high turnover, or folks coming from a different industry where they have zero familiarity and it's kind of an entry-level position where everybody needs this orientation, for example, you're going to put them in those realistic scenarios, and they're going to feel like they're in that moment. And you can also use it to assess how well they might know that job that you're going to be asking them to do if they've said that they've had prior experience.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you put them in the simulation and they seem to be lost, then obviously maybe they lied on their resume just a smidge.
So yeah, failure is an option. So if you're teaching somebody to move loads using a forklift, and they catch something going around a corner with the rear wheel turn that they have, or they pick up something that's too heavy, or go down a ramp the wrong way, you can show those moments of failure without the risk of getting hurt, right? That you would in a real world situation. So those can be great teaching moments with the safety net of VR, but really, again, feeling like you're in that moment.
So they get the hands-on type portion of the training, but without the risk of, if you're doing hands-on with an actual forklift and they actually have an accident, then they actually have an injury. But obviously in virtual reality, is what you're saying, is that you can have the accident. And again, I've actually experienced this a little bit. You can see, I usually pull the person out so they actually visualize within the VR, correct?
Yep, that's right. And as we mentioned earlier, employee engagement. I really can't stress enough how we talk to people about VR, and everybody's like, oh yeah, I've heard VR is cool. They haven't had a VR experience. They put it on, and I probably sound like I'm exaggerating and trying to hype this, but I'm trying to be unbiased here. When people put it on and they experience VR, they go, wow, right? This was something I didn't experience. So I want to encourage anybody, even if it's not for safety, just if your kids or your neighbor's kids, or if it's in Best Buy as a demo thing, go experience some VR, because it's coming, first of all, and it's also a way to relate to a lot of something that a lot of people are doing on their own, and it'll be in our industry. Right? There's some reports that say in the next 3 to 5 years, around 40% of the industry, VR is going to be mainstream in the manufacturing sector. So in terms of employee engagement, right, with the headset on, they can't get away from that that feeling, that engagement, that moment that they're in with decisions that they have to make about what to do next, and trying to logically put the pieces of something that's potentially new to them or apply something that they learned in classroom training or instructor-led training into practice in that moment.
Okay, and then obviously increased performance. I mean, what have you guys experienced as far as, or heard from your clients when it comes to, we've had employees, use the VR, they've experienced it, they've learned from it, and these were the results.
Yeah, there are studies. We don't have ourselves quantitative data on comparing, let's say, online training and VR training, but there are sources out there that we'll show at the end that have a significant increase. Something like 20% increase in effectiveness, 6 times less likely to make a mistake when learning through VR versus online training. So in the instances that we'll talk about in those studies, they're seeing the results.
Okay, and then obviously, cost is always going to be, we're talking, I'm thinking there's going to probably be a lot of business owners on here, or executives, or people that are, interested in this, obviously tuning into this webinar. I mean, what was the cost look like for something like this, or cost benefit, or what can you tell us about, the monetary? Show me the money.
Yeah, well, I think all you have to do is really, you can't really put a price on something that involves an employee in an accident that's significant, not to mention fines that might go along with that. So the investment, for a VR experience is in the tens of thousands of dollars for something custom, and I think that far outweighs and is probably a fraction of those other costs I just mentioned.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we've covered cost of accidents in previous webinars. They get tens of thousands real quick. It doesn't take a large accident before your insurance kicks in, administrative costs, and all the other costs that kick in. So obviously, reducing those costs can be, very prudent from even just a business standpoint, let alone, hey, it's cool, it's VR, and, we're actively engaging our employees.
Yeah, and our experience working with EH&S leaders at different organizations, I mean, they're not checking the box, right? I mean, I've made a couple of jokes about safety things with them, just trying to, build a relationship and kind of lighten up, and they don't really want to have any of that, right? I mean, they're very serious about their jobs. They want to innovate, and they want to do the best job possible. And if there's something like VR that is going to help you make a greater impact and engage your employees and increase the retention and better application of safety principles in your workplace, that sounds like a good conversation to have with somebody who is trying to do those kinds of things.
All right. Well, classroom training versus virtual reality training, and I think we've kind of covered a lot of these points already, so we don't necessarily need to beat this to death. But obviously, with the classroom, you can engage employees, but again, it's hard for them to get the actual experience. With VR, obviously, I mean, do you ever see like any difficulty with being instructed while you're in the VR system itself?
I think we try to tailor the experiences so that we're focused on what the goals are. So, for example, there might be a document that somebody needs to read and sign off on before they enter, let's say, an inspection process, or before they enter a certain area, they need to make sure that the scaffolding has been inspected, so it's safe to be there. Right? We won't have the entire document. We'll just refresh the fact and maybe highlight some key sections of that document that they would go into, right? So there's like the classroom training might outline in detail what those are, or give somebody to do in a sort of solitary way for them to take home and read. And in VR, we're reinforcing that step and the key pieces of information, but it's not an environment where you read things. So I think that in that way, that's kind of like the virtually hands-on training. And it's not really the, every last detail. It's trying to reinforce the principles of a process and a flow and get people to think about something in the actual environment.
Okay, and like how much of VR would you say is kind of going into where it's standalone, where, hey, here's your headset, play around with it for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever the module might be, or, however often or however long they should be playing around with it, and how much of it is more of instructor-led? Like how much does this get combined as far as you have someone standing there and kind of instructing them, do this, do that?
Yeah, so I can't speak to how much training a company would typically do in their safety training, but any one experience, we had for a local customer here, large manufacturer in the Pittsburgh area. We just created a training experience for a machine setup that was about 20-25 minutes long. So, and there's a walkthrough that goes with that would happen with an instructor beforehand, maybe as an assessment beforehand. So, I don't know if you had, 6 hours of safety orientation or a day of safety orientation. 25 minutes is I don't know, I'm bad at math. Probably like 10% of that.
But so you're saying that the VR can be structured either to be instructor-led, or it can be completely standalone, where these courses can be designed where you kind of give a basic overview of how it all works, leave the employee in the room, and allow them just to utilize it and kind of train themselves.
Yeah, for VR training, we usually have like an orientation so that somebody gets used to using the VR controllers and looking around the room, and what we call teleporting, which is, you don't want people walking around when they can't actually see, so you do this thing called teleporting, where you point to a spot on the floor in the VR environment and they're taken to that new spot. So there's a little bit of familiarity, getting used to the VR controls, and the training can be self-sufficient, but again, there's probably some things like the details and physical things, like putting on a harness. You're probably not going to do every last buckle of a harness in VR, right? You're going to grab a harness and you're going to kind of clip it to yourself with your controller and let it go, and then it's magically on you. So I think you'll always need some supplemental information for that. All right. So if you have some safety training about identifying safety hazards, you might have a broad view of that, and then your application might be a scenario where you randomly introduced some hazardous situations that you want them to highlight so that they could report it and take it to the safety lead on their shift or something.
Which kind of leads into, this is one tool, and mixing and matching the techniques definitely helps, but this is just one of those tools where, okay, now you think that they're somewhat trained, they kind of have a feel for it, now let's give them that experience with obviously the hazards. And obviously this is not a new thing. More and more companies are actually turning to VR, and obviously one of the ones that I think hit the headlines in a lot of different news sources was Walmart. And what can you tell us about what you know about what's going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if anybody knows anything about Walmart, it's probably that they're sometimes ruthless when it comes to like profit and making sure that they're getting the best value for the things that they're doing, and contracts with their suppliers. So they're very bottom line driven. So the idea that Walmart would invest in VR as a significant part of their training should say something, that they're seeing the results and they believe in its possibilities. So they're doing, at all levels of their management, they're using VR training, especially for onboarding or changes in roles, or even evaluating whether people in an existing role would be able to move up to a management role, let's say.
So this isn't just new employees. This could be, obviously implemented, and potentially is being implemented for your existing employees when you're gauging them for, hey, is they right for the promotion or the job shift or, other things. The VR experience can obviously help you to test your employee out before you obviously send them off live.
Yeah, right. And so, all levels of employees might never have experienced kind of a Black Friday situation where you're going to have frenzied shoppers. How do you deal with an angry customer, perhaps who is not pleased with maybe some other employee gave them a bad experience, or they're not pleased with a product and they feel that they should take that out on somebody at the store. So yeah, from clerks to cashiers to managers, all of those roles are being used at what at the time was about 200 plus training centers across the country.
So I mean, obviously if it's going to be used for cashiers, then I'd imagine it could have some serious industrial impact, depending on how everything is customized. And when it comes to the actual equipment, we kind of were talking, off air, so to speak. The equipment cost has come down, and a lot of new software has really become, a lot more advanced from what it was even a couple of years ago. But what can you tell us about the latest and greatest when it comes to the VR equipment?
Yeah, in terms of adoption of VR experiences and VR in industry, this is one of the most exciting advancements. Is the Oculus Quest launched in maybe like May of this year, 2019. And prior to this, all the information would be, all the gear would cost probably, $2,500 or $3,000, right? Not to mention the cases you need to lug around with it to go there, and the setup, right? You need a tower and a monitor, a keyboard, mouse, and then these things called lighthouses, which track your movement. So it's a pretty, you'd have quite a set of gear, and you look like a rock band going to set up for your next gig when you go to those trainings. Now what you're seeing on the screen, a headset which uses what's called inside out. So they've got cameras inside the headset that are tracking movement by looking at the environment around you in order to track your movement in the virtual environment, and those controllers in your hands. That's really all you need, and that setup right there from Oculus costs about $450. So you can literally have training in a box, right? You would obviously need to design the training that is loaded and side synced onto those devices, but package those up and put those in your carry-on bag, and you can go anywhere in the country. Or if you want to do some supplemental training or send it to your training folks in another plant, you could send that to them. If you want to train folks in parallel, you could buy 4 of those for a couple $1,000 and train a little faster. So no longer do you need people to go to a specific location like a safety center or briefing center. You can, it's very portable.
So it's gone down. So I mean, if I'm doing my math correctly, you said from like about $3,000 to $5,000 worth of equipment is now all stored in a $500 headset.
That's right.
It's making moves.
Yeah. So cost. I think the perception from most folks is like as with all equipment, has come down, right? Just like mobile phones. Well, I shouldn't say now because those are pretty expensive again, but they used to be really expensive. Then they got a lot cheaper, and now they're expensive
now they're moving back up. So the price is going the wrong way on that one. But that's
the cost of advancement here and the prices of these things are coming down, and that shouldn't be a barrier to entry for that.
Okay, and in some of the areas, now let's get into some of the areas that's currently being utilized or can be utilized. Obviously, for marketing purposes, what can you tell us about what that means? What we mean VR for marketing?
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is an image from an MSA mine safety demo that we did. This webinar is about training, but one thing we'll talk about here is marketing. They needed an experience that would get people through an example of their products in use in confined spaces and down manholes. Their Extirpa that helps to, if someone's unconscious down a manhole, there's somebody on the surface that would crank them out of there, and lift them up to safety. They had specific tasks to perform. So just imagine a trade show floor where you've got an Extirpa and you're trying to explain to somebody how they would need to put a harness on and clip this to them, and then you would, trust me, I'll get you out of that manhole. Or you would take a piece of equipment, an 18-wheeler somewhere, and try to demo this to somebody. This enables you to transport them into that moment and experience how your products are actually practically used in a specific situation. So that's, they complete a task, and they were extremely pleased with the results of this and are continuing to add features to it today.
All right, and then another thing would be for orientation. I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm not going to steal your thunder. You're on a roll. Keep it going.
Yeah, so if you have new employees and they're going to be asked to do lots of things, like inspection, I think I've mentioned that a couple times before, but there's an experience we've developed for another local industrial customer where there's 2 parts to it. One is kind of like a fly-through, kind of step-by-step, giving people like what are the names of things in this environment, and taking the right equipment like a flashlight and a camera to do the inspection so they can identify and take pictures of things that are issues, making sure they come out with everything they took in. And then it's also a very confined space. So, and there's also radiation. Yeah, oh, by the way, it's a radioactive
Oh,
environment.
that's an afterthought. Oh, by the way, there just happens to be a bunch of radiation down here.
Right. So again, safety, right? Making mistakes and doing things in an environment that would otherwise be hazardous to somebody. You can give them the orientation and train them in an environment that feels real. You're not going to feel the bumps of things around you in a VR experience that you would in a more confined space environment. But you'll get the sense of feeling like you're in an enclosed environment. You'll have to move with some agility between some very tight spaces and go up ladders between platforms and things like that. And then there can be randomization, right? If you're trying to identify things, we've built in some quizzes during the process here, like what is this part and what is that part. So if people need to know these things because they can't take a pencil and paper and a reference chart into this thing with them. How do they know what they're looking at, right? So to be able to identify those things when they come out and file their report.
So as they're going through the training, you can do an instant quiz and say, okay, what did you just learn, or what are you looking at here? So it's not just a matter of they're experiencing it, but you can actually test them as they're going.
That's right.
All right, which takes us into training, VR for training, which is a big reason why a lot of people are listening in right now, and some of the applications and practical uses for that. So tell us a little bit more on the training aspect of virtual reality.
Yeah, so training, this is an image of a video that we'll see here, a demo where this is what it feels like for somebody to be in VR, right? The person there with their helmet on and their vest and their arm holding a virtual flashlight, right? That's a virtual flashlight shining virtual light on a virtual piece of equipment. That's what they feel. And that's hard because when you look at somebody doing VR, you see somebody like, crouching down and leaning a certain way. But training, I guess I'm getting excited because it feels real, and that's hard to convey if people haven't had a VR experience. And I would encourage people to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the huge thing is obviously Lancaster Safety and OpenArc has been partnering, and we've been up to your offices, and some of our employees here, including myself, have put it on, and yeah, it's completely different. You don't really realize what it is, and a technological leap that has been taken over the last few years, where you sit in there, and obviously one of the biggest issues with VR is vertigo, and that's just a testament to how realistic it is.
Yeah, so the tribal knowledge that I talked about earlier, there's for this particular project, there was a guy named Tom who had all of the knowledge, and there were a couple of other trainers, but there was no consistent way. If we had a meeting where, of course, we asked them to tell us what the process was, and for that meeting, they did a bunch of work to document the process, right? It wasn't in their I'm not saying that everybody's like that, but that can happen at organizations where things evolve and best practices are not well documented. And even if they are documented, maybe they could be more efficient. This actually the process of making this experience prompted some good discussions, and they actually had their process improvement team interested in trying to see if there were ways to make this process a little more lean for themselves.
Well, not only that, too, it's like I think with a lot of companies, and we've all experienced this, if you work especially for a little bit larger of an organization, when you walk into an organization, you're reliant for that on-the-job training with the person that you're training with. Well, over the course of years and different branches and different locations and facilities, obviously, the way people are trained to do things can kind of differ quite wildly from one facility to the next, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. But obviously with the VR experience, if you have a set and it's kind of like, it's guiding you through, this is the way things are to be done, it can kind of make things more uniform across the company as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and you got to empathize with Tom, right? And they're hiring quickly in these positions, and it's like, Tom, you got to train somebody else again. It's like, do you think Tom really wants to do that? That's downtime for him. It benefits the company, but having somebody go through something like this first so that they get a running start when Tom gets them, that would be a big help to him as well.
Absolutely. And I think up next, if I'm not mistaken, is our demo here. So you want to introduce this and tell us what we're going to be looking at here?
Yeah, so we've done a project with Arconic locally, which is the image that we were just looking at. And this talks a little bit about what the current state is and what the challenge is, and then gives a little bit of a demo of what some of the key tasks are in that training, which again takes about 20-25 minutes. And what's not shown here is there's also a 360 video that is watching and annotating, narrating this trainer, Tom, doing the job so that somebody could watch the video, then they could get kind of guided hands-on training through the process, and then they could actually do it using the machine. So it's a progression from just seeing it happen, being taught to do it, and then doing it themselves, which is a good paradigm for learning.
Excellent, excellent.
All right, let's jump into it.
Let's jump into it.
Entry-level positions are where you get your foot in the door and gain experience to move up. At Arconic, a die press operator is entry-level. They set up and run a die press that stamps and cuts metal workpieces that are used in the manufacture of aircraft parts. Because this position has high turnover, training to ensure the safe use of these decades-old machines is extremely important. Without this training, the risk of making dangerous and costly mistakes increases and could result in injury to themselves or their coworkers, material waste, or damage to the die that ends the run, incurs cost, and causes production delays. This hands-on VR training takes 20 to 30 minutes and has guided audio and visual cues to help along the way. VR training is safer, more scalable, more consistent, and provides a more engaging training experience that employees will remember.
So, as we've talked about, the demo, I mean, that looks awesome. I mean, the graphics and stuff like that and how far we've come. But, we mentioned a few times already, it doesn't do it justice until you actually try it on. So we'd encourage everyone listening to this to, like Mark said, if you're having an opportunity to experience this, whether it be at a Best Buy or you're out somewhere or maybe you have a friend or a nephew or a son or a daughter that obviously, has some virtual reality for gaming or whatever, definitely test it out because that'll really bring this back to life. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the business advantages to VR training, and we'll kind of cap it off with that. And I believe we'll get into questions here shortly. Anyone that does have questions, feel free to type in, and I believe the ones that directed to the moderator. We'll take a look at some of those questions in a few moments here and try to address a couple of them. Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. We probably should have introduced that earlier in there, but feel free to chat along here. We're obviously going to try to monitor these comments and address some of these questions as well. So the business advantage for VR training, and I think we've covered a lot of this. Cost is definitely coming down quite a bit when it comes to how much it costs to perform one of these trainings, especially compared to some of the other stylistic trainings that we've talked about. So, over time, we can see definitely VR being more cost efficient. Right now, it's kind of considered, cost intensive, but that's definitely coming down. The flexibility of VR training, where, whether it's, you have someone actually leading them, or especially the ones where you can, put on the headset and kind of use it yourself. Allow, even for refresher training, you have an employee, maybe they make a mistake, something comes up, or they just are unsure of themselves, they can go in, use it. They're not waiting for an instructor. They're not waiting for someone to, help them with hands-on. They can go experience it and, try to utilize the software themselves. Obviously, it's very scalable. Whether you're a small company or you're a multinational, being able to take the training and, just as I kind of got into earlier, you can use it and everybody's getting the same training. It's not like, okay, well, Tom's going to train one way, Mark's going to train another, and Jim is going to train in a third way, and they're all going to be teaching someone a little bit differently. And for that matter, you're getting consistent information because maybe someone got trained by Tom originally, and now they're getting trained by Sally. And again, they're looking at things a little bit differently, and now you're getting some misinformation and some conflicting information, which could obviously confuse the employees. It certainly can shrink your onboarding time as well. I mean, as you have people coming on board and you got to dedicate X number of hours to bring them up to speed, as they're doing their safety training, they're obviously learning about the company, learning about the industry if they're not familiar. So that's certainly a huge, huge benefit to that. And getting that engagement. We talked about the different type of training topics and training techniques that, various companies use. Some of them engage the employees, some of them don't. And this is one way to where, you can implement quizzes, as Mark said, right as they're doing that, but they're involved. No one's falling asleep during a VR training. It certainly has its pros and cons like every other training method, but no one's going to put on that headset and fall asleep. They're definitely going to be engaged with the material, and that you can test them on it in real time, and obviously they can do it multiple times. You can repeat the training. So if you have someone that's really struggling, they can take the time, and obviously if they've been through it and they're familiar with the software and how it all operates and works, they can go back in and redo the training multiple times with or without the instructor in a lot of cases. So there certainly is a lot of advantages for virtual reality training. So, obviously there's a reason why it's taken off. And, as Mark mentioned earlier, there's a reason why Walmart, one of the biggest, cost-conscious companies in America, we're seeing it pop up even in organizations like that. Mark, is there anything I missed?
Yeah, I would say one thing that comes to mind is just the fun factor. People get excited about VR and the smiles that are on people's faces when you say that, hey, we're doing some safety training and it's going to use VR this year. Like, how just imagine your employees and how would they react to coming to like the annual safety briefing or a quarterly safety briefing, and if you just tacked on at the end of it, we're using VR this year. I think just the technology itself excites most people, and I think a lot of people would be engaged in it, not to mention the benefits that we've already talked about from using VR and how sticky that information would be versus other in combination with other traditional methods.
Absolutely. I mean, something new is exciting for a lot of people, and obviously having a different way of getting things done and training and just something further to gauge their employees. Certainly, I'd imagine would pay dividends. So, proven impact of VR, and this is something I think you could speak to more about than I could. We do, I guess, a little bit of statistics here, and there's a few things that a few studies obviously that have been conducted.
Yeah, so the natural question is this just a toy, or what's the ROI going to be? So for anybody to spend money on anything new, people want evidence, and with something new, it's really hard to get empirical evidence. So there's a little bit of a leap in what you believe is the right thing to do, but there is some research out there, and these are three main pieces of data that we found that are pretty compelling. That using VR, the recall accuracy was about 12% better for VR versus computer-based training. For surgical residents doing a particular procedure, the folks who used VR did it 29% faster and were 6 times less likely to make an error. And that, I think, speaks volumes. So you can imagine, right, that's a very technical procedure, very focused. We're not talking about a simple task. We're talking about something
doing it faster too is because you have these situations, and obviously surgery, but in a lot of different situations you might have, you're unsure, and if you're doing it hands-on real life and you make that mistake, it can be very costly. VR kind of frees you up to do it quicker, and if you make a mistake, okay, well, I can see the consequences, but I'm not going to feel them. And that makes perfect sense. And then obviously, yeah, that was the Michigan study, or Yale study, I'm sorry. And then 43% on manufacturing companies say VR became mainstream in their organization within the next 3 years. So obviously, there's more companies looking towards this. So we're going to open it up to questions. And, again, we have a few coming through here. I'm going to cherry pick a couple, and we'll kind of talk about these. And if we don't get to your question, definitely put them in there. A lot of times we'll reach out, or address these in newsletters, and certainly, if your question isn't answered specifically here, take no offense, and definitely check back in on our website. There's a good chance we'll follow this up with some type of information of some sort. But the questions stand out to me, and this is nice and short. So thank you for keeping this very condensed. Is how difficult it is to use, and Mark, you'd be better to answer this than me.
Yeah, everybody seems to pick it up with a little bit of orientation. There's not 50 buttons. You kind of do a limited set of things. There's probably 5 core actions in most of our trainings, and as long as you give somebody a little bit of education about how to use VR before they get into performing the job-specific tasks, there's a little bit of onboarding going on there. People seem to do really well. So it's not super difficult to use, even for folks who say, I don't even know how to use my smartphone. So, and we talk people through it, and if VR ends up not working for one of your employees, that's okay, right? There are other learning methods that can be used. But in our experience, we haven't really run into that yet.
Even in the older generation?
Yeah, it's folks adapt really well, right? And they're oh, this is really cool, right? And they're they're trying to make it work, and they're eager to please, and they think it's a neat thing to do. So they make it work, and again, it's not super complicated. We're not asking them to do some things that you often have to do to restart your computer, involve multiple keys and the power button. I mean, it's not right. People learn to do all that But this is fairly simple, fairly straightforward, and the actions that you do are repetitive. So to move, you might be moving around. You do that the same way all the time. If you pick things up, there's a gripper on the controller that feels like you're picking something up, and there might be a menu button to enter a particular part of the experience. There's not a ton of actions, so we try to make them feel pretty natural. Pointing to a person and indicating what you'd like to communicate with them about is one example, right? So doing that is kind of a universal principle, and then based on the context that you're in, you might have different things that you could say to somebody, for example.
Okay, and actually right along those lines, and I'll just choose this one because it's right in line with what you were saying, if you will, or an extension of that answer. How much space would you need to set up VR training? And I know you kind of got into this a little bit during the presentation. Where it used to be towers, and now we've got just the inward, outward, and a couple earpieces, and a couple other small pieces. But like, how much space would if a company's interested in VR and maybe they don't have an extensive training room? I mean, what type of parameters would they need in order to make it work?
Yeah, you can with the new Quest and with the Vive. The Vive, you would need your computer, the HTC Vive, that is more of a connected system. They both need about the same space, but with the HTC Vive and other, like the Rift, might need all the computer and the monitor and the keyboard, etc., and the lighthouses. But for Oculus Quest, you only need a flat area that's about 10 by 10, 10 feet by 10 feet. And you could do it in a parking lot. You could do it in your office space. You really just need a flat area where you can do this, and there would be enough differentiation, I guess, in some of the textures around it so that it could track your head movements and simulate those head movements in the virtual environment. So it's a pretty small area. You don't need a big investment of time, and it doesn't have to be a dedicated space, right? It could be something that's used for something else, and then when training day comes, you make space for VR training.
Well, speaking of time, another question that kind of caught my eye, and again, this would be more for you. People aren't sending me questions, I guess. How long does it take to customize a training program for our needs? So, I guess I imagine what they're trying to get at would be, what's we mentioned about the software or about the physical hardware. I guess that'd be considered, but the software. They come to Lancaster, they come to OpenArc, and they're interested. Hey, I want to set up, a training module, and let's say we'll use like a 10-minute module, for example. So they're interested. The financials are worked out. You get the green light. What type of time frame would it be to create something that would be obviously customized to that organization?
Sure, something that's simpler, that is more like a walkthrough and doesn't have a lot of logic would be maybe like a 4 to 6 week kind of thing. Something that is a more complex model, for example, if there's a little bit of transition from a CAD model, like an engineering model of a piece of machinery, you kind of need to simplify it so it renders quickly, effectively in VR, and that can take some time. So a complicated environment where you've got lots of machinery that you need to simplify, and then you might be moving through a space and you might have a quiz. Something like that is more like a 8, 10, 12 week endeavor.
Okay, so obviously that the time can add up. It depends on how interactive they want it. If it's kind of more linear, then obviously you're looking at a shorter time frame. If the client would like something a little bit more unique and have different twists and turns and reactions to it, then obviously that's going to add, because obviously you got to software that in. That shows my software knowledge. You got to software that in, folks. But obviously, yes. So it depends on how complex, I guess, the system would be or how long it would take. Correct? Am I hearing that?
Yeah. The video that we saw, they wanted to train people on that specific piece of machinery with the specific kinds of bolts and clamps that they use, and the wedging bar to anchor the key in place in the keystone. So there was a lot of stuff that was specific that they wanted it just like that, versus hey, this really could be anywhere, and we're really just looking for safety hazards, right? And they don't need to be our plant. We just need to get across that they understand the principles of the things that are potential safety hazards or safety violations that we might get a fine for. So, yeah, you're right about that. It just depends on the complexity. but that should give a decent range for how long it takes to make things and create those experiences.
Okay, well, we're butting up against our hour here. I know we have a few minutes left, but I think we're just going to wrap it at this point. But I will encourage anyone, if you do have questions or you'd like to learn more, again, Lancaster Safety, you can reach us at 888-403-6026. Definitely give us a call if you have those questions. If you're a client, feel free to talk to whatever representative you're working with. If you're not a client, good question is why not? But feel free to reach out, contact us, or shoot us even a web form. I know you can do that through the website. Say, hey, listen to VR web. But again, we are tracking the comments or the questions that are in there. And again, we'll try to address those in one way, shape, or form. Mark, I want to thank you again for joining us today. This has been very informative. And from all of us at Lancaster Safety, we appreciate your attendance and your business, and we look forward to speaking to you in the next one.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, everybody.